I was watching the appraisal of a 19th century Tiffany lamp on Antiques Roadshow. It was the only hour of the day I truly claimed for myself, a moment of quiet appreciation for things that have stood the test of time. Then, without a warning, the screen went black. The silence in the room was sudden and violent. I saw my own reflection in the dark glass of the television looking confused, and behind me the reflection of my son-in-law Carter. He was holding the power cord in his hand, dangling it like a dead snake. "Enough of this trash," he said, his voice dripping with that casual arrogance he had perfected over the last 2 years. "In this house, we watch smart things. We feed our brains with the future, Wallace, not dusty old junk from the past." My daughter Brittany was standing in the doorway leading to the kitchen. She was holding a glass of wine even though it was a Tuesday night. I looked at her, waiting. I was waiting for her to say, "Carter, plug it back in." I was waiting for her to say, "Carter, this is my father's house, show some respect." But she didn't. She just stood there, swirling the red liquid in her glass, and nodded along. "You know he is right, Dad," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. "Carter is stressed about the launch. We need an environment of high performance here. Not whatever this is." I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the armrests of my leather recliner. I am a structural engineer by trade. I spent 40 years calculating load-bearing limits. I know exactly how much pressure a beam can take before it snaps. And in that moment, sitting in the dark living room of the house I built with my own money, looking at the 2 people living here rent-free, I felt a hairline fracture appear in my chest. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I simply stood up, smoothed out my shirt, and walked past them to the stairs. As I climbed the steps to my bedroom, I could hear Carter plugging the TV back on to stream some loud, frantic documentary about cryptocurrency. They thought my silence was submission. They were wrong. It was calculation. Before I continue with what happened the next morning, I want to know something. Have you ever let someone stay in your home to help them out, only to have them treat you like a guest in your own house? Let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had to bite your tongue to keep the peace, hit that like button. I want to see how many of us are out there. The next morning, the sun was barely up when I went down to the kitchen. My routine has been the same for 30 years. I wake up, I grind my beans, and I brew a pot of dark roast in my old reliable drip coffee maker. It is not fancy, but it works. It was the first thing my late wife and I bought for this kitchen. But when I reached for it on the counter, my hand grasped empty air. The counter was bare. My coffee maker was gone. In its place stood a chrome monster, a sleek digital machine that looked more like a spaceship engine than a kitchen appliance. It was humming with a low, menacing buzz. I looked around and saw my old machine in the trash bin, the glass carafe shattered against a half-eaten takeout container. Carter walked in, then wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first car. He saw me staring at the trash. "Oh, good morning, Wallace," he said, grabbing a bottle of alkaline water from the fridge. "I did us a favor. I tossed that relic. It was an eyesore. This new machine is a barista-grade espresso station. It connects to the Wi-Fi. It optimizes the extraction rate based on humidity." I felt the blood rushing to my ears. "Carter," I said, my voice low, "that was my machine. You do not throw away my property." Carter laughed, a short, dismissive bark of a sound. He leaned against the island, looking at me with pity. "We are upgrading your life, Wallace. You should be thanking me. That old thing was brewing sludge. We are optimizing this household. Efficiency is key. Besides, Brittany and I agreed it didn't fit the aesthetic we are going for." "The aesthetic you are going for," I repeated slowly. "Carter, let me remind you of a structural fact. You and Brittany moved in here 2 years ago because your first startup collapsed and the bank took your condo. You were supposed to stay for 6 months. I am not your roommate. I am your landlord, your financier, and your father-in-law. And you just threw my property in the garbage." Carter's smile didn't fade, but his eyes got colder. He took a sip of water, and set the bottle down hard. Let's not rewrite history, Wallace. We are here because this house is too big for one old man. We are managing your assets. We are bringing life into this mausoleum. And frankly, your attitude right now is exactly why you are stuck in the past. You are clinging to junk. I am trying to build a future. He checked his smartwatch, dismissing me entirely. Anyway, we don't have time for this petty drama. We have a major event tonight. That is actually what I needed to talk to you about. He tapped a few buttons on the new coffee machine, and it started hissing loudly, spitting out a tiny cup of black liquid. Tonight is the pre-launch mixer for my new venture, Green Chain. I have invited 6 of the biggest angel investors in the state. They are coming here to this house at 7 o'clock. I looked at him confused. You invited investors here? Without asking me, Brittany walked in, then dressed for work in a sharp blazer, looking every bit the successful executive, despite the fact that her credit card debt was currently sitting under my name. She poured herself a cup from the new machine and stood next to her husband. It is a huge opportunity, Dad, she said, finally looking at me. Carter is going to close a $2 million seed round. This house, well, the location is impressive. It shows stability. It shows old money. Old money, I said. You mean my money? Carter waved his hand. Semantics. Wallace. Look, here is the situation. These investors, they are young, they are aggressive, they are disruptors. Image is everything. We are selling them a vision of the future. High-tech, high-speed, zero friction. He paused, looking me up and down. I was wearing my flannel shirt and my comfortable corduroys. I looked like what I was, a retired engineer who liked to work in his garden. And I asked. And Carter said, clearing his throat, You don't fit the brand, Wallace. Honestly, you look like, well, you look like yesterday. Having you wander around the party telling boring stories about concrete and steel beams, it kills the vibe. It makes us look like we are living with our grandpa because we have to. It lowers our valuation. I stared at them. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. So what are you asking me to do? I asked. Leave my own house, go to a hotel? No. Brittany said quickly, stepping forward and putting a hand on my arm. Her touch felt cold. We wouldn't kick you out, Dad. We just need you to blend in. Carter smirked. Actually, I had a better idea. A stroke of genius, really. He walked over to the window and pointed to the garden. The hedges out back are looking a little rough, Wallace, and the rose bushes need pruning. Why don't you spend the evening working on them? Put on those old overalls you love so much. If anyone asks who you are, just keep your head down. Maybe hold a pair of shears. They will assume you are the gardener. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. You want me to pretend to be the help? In the house I built with my own hands. It is just role play, Wallace, Carter said, laughing. Don't be so sensitive. It adds to the mystique. It shows we have staff. It elevates our status. Plus you love gardening. It is a win-win. Just stay outside, keep quiet, and don't make eye contact with the investors. We will bring you a plate of leftovers when they leave. I looked at Brittany. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I sketched blueprints. I was looking for any sign of outrage, any sign of defense. But all I saw was calculation. She wanted this money. She wanted the lifestyle Carter promised her, even if it meant erasing me to get it. Please, Dad, she whispered. Just for tonight. Do it for me. Don't ruin this for us. I took a deep breath. The hairline fracture in my chest cracked open a little wider. I looked at the chrome coffee machine. I looked at the trash can where my memories lay broken. And then I looked at my daughter and her husband. Okay, I said. My voice was calm, unnaturally calm. I will do it. I will be the gardener. Carter clapped his hands together. Fantastic. See, I knew you could be a team player. Now excuse us, we have catering to coordinate. Stay out of the kitchen, Wallace. We need to stage the hors d'oeuvres. They turned their backs on me. They went back to their planning, their buzzing efficiency, their future. They didn't see me walk out the back door. They didn't see me walk to the tool shed at the bottom of the garden. Inside the shed, the air smelled of oil soil and honest work. It was a smell I understood. I took my heavy canvas overalls off the hook. I put them on, buttoning them slowly one by one. I put on my old work boots. I picked up my pruning shears. I tested the blade with my thumb. It was sharp. Then I took out my phone. I didn't open the gardening app. I scrolled down to a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Sullivan. He answered on the second ring. Wallace, everything okay? You haven't called since the funeral. I looked through the dusty window of the shed back at my house. I could see Carter and Brittany in the kitchen laughing, high-fiving. They looked like they owned the world. They thought I was a harmless old man. They thought I was a resource to be mined, a prop to be staged. They forgot that I was a structural engineer. They forgot that before you build anything new, you have to inspect the foundation. And if the foundation is rotten, you don't paint over it. You condemn it. I am fine, Sully, I said into the phone. But I need a favor. Do you remember that file we put together when Carter first moved in, the contingency plan? You called it Project Parasite. There was a pause on the line. Then Sullivan's voice came back sharp and professional. I have it right here in the safe, Wallace. You told me never to open it unless it was an absolute emergency. You said you didn't want to destroy your family. I gripped the pruning shears tighter. I watched Carter throw his head back and laugh at something Brittany said. The family is already destroyed, Sully, I said. Open the file, activate the clauses, all of them, and Sully. Bring the paperwork tonight. I'm hosting a party. I hung up the phone. I stepped out of the shed into the bright morning sunlight. They wanted a gardener, fine. I was going to do some weeding, and I was going to start by cutting out the invasive species that had taken over my home. By 7 o'clock, the transformation was complete. My living room, usually a place of quiet reading and comfortable silence, had been turned into a stage set for a play I never auditioned for. The warm yellow light of my vintage lamps was replaced by harsh modern LED strips that Carter had installed to create what he called an atmosphere of innovation. Electronic music thumped softly from hidden speakers, a repetitive, soulless rhythm that felt like a headache waiting to happen. I stood in the hallway, adjusting the strap of my heavy canvas overalls. I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look like the man who had designed bridges that spanned great rivers. I looked like a prop, a rustic accessory to highlight their modern brilliance. I took a deep breath, picked up a silver tray loaded with crystal glasses, and stepped into the lion's den. The room was filled with people who looked like carbon copies of Carter. The men wore suits that were too tight and shoes that were too shiny. The women wore dresses that looked like geometric puzzles. They held their wine glasses by the bowl, not the stem, leaving greasy fingerprints on the crystal I had bought in Paris 30 years ago. Carter was holding court by the fireplace. He had one hand resting casually on the oak mantelpiece, my mantelpiece looking every inch the lord of the manor. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, offering drinks, keeping my head down just as I was told. As I approached Carter's circle, I heard his voice booming with unearned confidence. This house was an absolute wreck when we acquired it. Carter lied, his voice smooth as silk. A total gut job. We wanted to capture that turn-of-the-century industrial spirit, but with a modern twist. It is all about reclaiming heritage and repurposing it for the digital age. That is the philosophy behind everything I do. I gritted my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. A wreck, I had built this house to withstand a Category 4 hurricane. The foundation was reinforced concrete. The timber was hand-selected. He was calling my life's work a wreck just to make his renovation story sound more heroic. One of the investors, a man with a shaved head and glasses that probably cost more than my truck, nodded appreciatively. "It is impressive, Carter. Truly. It speaks to the solidity of your vision. And speaking of vision, tell us more about Green Chain. The market is volatile right now. Why is your coin different?" This was the moment Carter had been waiting for. He stepped away from the fireplace, expanding his chest. "Gentlemen, look around you. The old world is heavy. It is slow. It is made of bricks and mortar and paper money. Green Chain is the antidote. It is an ecosystem, frictionless, decentralized. We are not just mining crypto, we are mining the future. Our algorithm uses surplus energy from smart homes just like this one to validate transactions. It is virtually free money generated by simply existing." He was using buzzwords like, "A magician uses smoke to hide the fact that there was nothing there." I knew enough about engineering to know that energy is never free. It always comes from somewhere. And in this case, I had a sinking suspicion it was coming from my bank account. As I moved to refill the empty glass of the man with the shaved head, a woman in a red dress turned and almost bumped into me. She jumped back, looking at my dirty overalls with a mixture of surprise and distaste. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. She turned to Carter. "I didn't realize you had staff working the party, Carter. Is this your father?" The room went quiet. This was the test. Brittany was standing by the window, nervously twisting her wedding ring. She looked at me, then looked at Carter. Carter didn't even blink. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Heavens no. That is just old Wally. He comes with the property in a way. He takes care of the grounds, keeps the roses alive. He is a bit simple, you know, lives in his own little world out in the garden shed. We let him help out tonight to make him feel useful. Simple." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. I felt the tray in my hands tremble. I wanted to drop it. I wanted to smash the crystal against the wall and scream that I had a master's degree in structural engineering. I wanted to tell them that the man they were listening to couldn't change a light bulb without calling a technician. But I didn't. I forced my hands to still. I forced my face into a vacant, amiable smile. I was playing the long game. And in the long game, you don't reveal your hand until the pot is full. "Good evening, folks," I mumbled, affecting a slight slur. "Just keeping the glasses full. Don't mind me." Carter beamed, patting me on the shoulder with a condescending heaviness. "Good man, Wally. Why don't you go check on the appetizers in the kitchen? The grown-ups are talking business." I nodded and shuffled away, playing the part of the obedient servant. But as I turned, I heard the man with the shaved head ask one more question. "Carter, I must say the architectural integrity of this place is stunning. These ceiling beams, are they decorative or load-bearing?" I paused near the door, waiting for the answer. Those beams were the spine of the house. They held up the master bedroom suite where my wife and I had slept for 20 years. Carter laughed again, sipping his wine. "Oh, purely decorative. Just hollow wood glued to the ceiling for that rustic look. We are planning to tear them out next month to open up the space, make it more airy." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just insulting me anymore. He was dangerous. He didn't know the difference between decoration and structure. If he removed those beams, the second floor would collapse. And that was exactly what he was doing with his company. He was removing the support beams of financial reality and calling it innovation. I walked into the kitchen and set the tray down on the counter. My hands were shaking not from age but from a cold, hard fury. They thought I was the past. They thought I was debris to be cleared away. But they forgot one thing about old engineers. We know exactly where the weak points are. And we know exactly where to place the dynamite to bring the whole thing down. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my overalls. It was time. I sent a single text message to Sullivan. "They are here. The bait is taken. Close the trap." I was circling the room with a bottle of Pinot Noir in one hand and a napkin in the other when the conversation shifted. The group had moved to the center of the great hall directly beneath the main dome. It was my favorite part of the house. I designed it myself 30 years ago, inspired by the Pantheon, but adapted for a modern residence. The investor with the shaved head, whose name I learned was Mr. Sterling, stopped mid-sentence. He tilted his head back, adjusting his glasses as he stared up at the intricate latticework of the ceiling. "This is remarkable," Sterling said, his voice echoing slightly in the acoustic perfection of the space. "I have seen vaulted ceilings before, but this is different. The way the light hits the apex, it almost looks like the structure is floating." "Is this original to the property, Carter, or is this part of your renovation genius?" I saw Carter freeze. He took a sip of his drink, stalling. He had no idea what he was looking at. To him, it was just a roof. But he couldn't admit ignorance. Not tonight. Not when he was selling himself as a visionary. "Oh," that Carter said, waving his hand dismissively. "It is a nice touch, isn't it? But honestly, it is mostly cosmetic. We had contractors come in to apply a faux finish to the plaster to give it that heavy structural look. It is all about the aesthetic of weight without the actual burden of it. Purely decorative." I felt a physical pain in my chest. It was an insult to the physics of the building. To say my dome was cosmetic was like saying a suspension bridge is just a string. I couldn't stop myself. I stepped forward to refill Mr. Sterling's glass. "Actually," I said softly, my voice cutting through the ambient electronic music, "it is a self-supporting catenary arch system." The conversation died instantly. Carter's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with warning. Mr. Sterling looked down at me, intrigued. "Excuse me," Sterling asked. I kept my eyes on the wine as I poured, but my voice was steady. "It is not cosmetic, sir. It is a compression ring design. There are no internal supports because the weight is distributed outward to the perimeter walls. If it were just plaster, as Carter suggests, gravity would have pulled it down 10 years ago. The beauty isn't in the finish. It is in the mathematics." Sterling looked at me, then back up at the ceiling, then back at me. He smiled a genuine, impressed smile. "You seem to know a lot about structural engineering for a gardener," he said. I felt Carter's presence beside me, radiating heat like a furnace. I tightened my grip on the bottle. "I just read a lot, sir," I murmured. "And I know this house. It has good bones." Sterling chuckled. "Well, Carter, your gardener has a better grasp of your asset than you do. You should put him on the payroll as a consultant." The group laughed. It was polite laughter meant to ease the tension, but to Carter it must have sounded like a death knell. His face turned a mottled shade of red. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. I had committed the ultimate sin. I had made him look small in his own kingdom. I turned to move away, thinking the moment had passed. I thought I had made my point, but I underestimated the fragility of a narcissist's ego. As I stepped past Carter, I saw his arm move. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was a sharp, calculated jerk of his elbow. His glass of red wine collided with my chest. The impact was cold and wet. The dark liquid splashed across the front of my canvas overalls, soaking into the fabric, instantly looking like a fresh, gaping wound. The glass fell from his hand and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silent room. "Oh no!" Carter shouted, his voice pitched loud and fake. "Look what you did, Wallace." He stepped back, wiping a microscopic drop of wine from his own lapel, looking at me with pure disgust. I stood there, wine dripping from my chin, the bottle still clutched in my hand. I looked at him. I saw the triumph in his eyes. He wanted to reduce me. He wanted to remind everyone, and especially me, of my place. "You clumsy old fool," Carter hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "I try to give you a simple job, just walking around with a bottle, and you can't even handle that. You are ruining the evening." Brittany rushed over then. But she didn't come to check if I was okay. She came with a handful of cocktail napkins, dabbing at the floor, not looking at me. "Dad. Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just go to the kitchen." Carter snatched the wine bottle from my hand. "Go clean yourself up, Wallace," he commanded, pointing to the service door. "And don't come back out until you are sober." Honestly apologizing to everyone, it is so hard to find good help these days, especially when you hire out of charity. The guests looked away, uncomfortable. They stared at their shoes, at the paintings, anywhere but at the old man dripping with wine in the center of the room. They accepted Carter's narrative because it was easier than confronting the cruelty they had just witnessed. I didn't say a word. I didn't wipe the wine from my face. I let it sit there, sticky and cold. I looked Carter dead in the eye. I wanted him to remember this face. I wanted him to remember exactly what I looked like in this moment of humiliation. Because when I brought his world crashing down, I wanted him to know that this was the moment the demolition charges were set. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. My heavy boots echoed on the floor. With every step, I wasn't walking away. I was marching toward the war room. The time for gardening was over. The time for excavation had begun. And the first thing I was going to dig up was the truth about Green Chain. The last luxury sedan pulled out of the driveway at midnight. Mr. Sterling had shaken my hand at the door with a look of genuine pity before walking out into the night. When the heavy oak door finally clicked shut, the silence that filled the hallway was not peaceful. It was suffocating. The electronic music had stopped, leaving only the sound of Carter's heavy breathing. He spun around, his face twisted with a mixture of exhaustion and rage. He didn't even wait for Brittany to clean up the broken glass on the floor. "You humiliated me, Wallace," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "I bring the most important people in the industry to this house to sell them a vision, and you decide to play professor. You made me look like an idiot in my own home. You made me look incompetent." I stood there, the dried wine still staining my overalls, and said nothing. My silence only made him angrier. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his eyes manic. "I am done playing nice," he hissed. "I am done pretending this arrangement works. I need this space for Green Chain headquarters. We are expanding, and I cannot have a senile gardener wandering around, correcting my investors on structural physics. This is my ultimatum, Wallace. You have 30 days. He held up 3 fingers, shoving them near my face. 30 days to find a nursing home that will take you. I don't care which one, just get out. After that, this floor is being gutted. We are tearing down those beams you love so much and turning this into an open concept office." I looked over his shoulder at Brittany. She was standing by the table, stacking plates, refusing to meet my gaze. "Carter is right, Dad," she said softly, her voice flat. "It is for the best. You need professional care. We need the space to build our future." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of a man who has just finished his calculations and knows exactly when the bridge will fall. They thought they were evicting me. They thought they had won. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You are right, Carter," I said quietly. 30 days is a long time. A lot can happen in 30 days. I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving them standing in the ruins of their party. They thought they had given me a deadline, but as I closed my bedroom door and looked at the file Sullivan had delivered earlier that evening, I knew the truth. They didn't have 30 days. They didn't even have 30 hours. The countdown had already started, and I was the one holding the detonator. The wine stain on my chest was like a target. I scrubbed it in the shower until my skin was raw, but the humiliation went deeper than the fabric. Many of you might be wondering why I didn't strike him, why I didn't overturn the table and kick him out right there in front of his investors. It is a fair question. Any father would want to defend his dignity. But I am not just a father. I am a structural engineer, and in my profession, we do not act on impulse. Impulse is for amateurs. Impulse causes cracks. Control maintains integrity. If I had thrown him out tonight in a fit of rage, he would have played the victim perfectly. He would have sued me for wrongful eviction. He would have used Brittany's testimony to paint me as unstable, violent, and senile. He would have won the narrative. No. To bring down a structure as rotten as Carter, you don't use a sledgehammer. You use gravity. You let its own weight pull it down. But first, you need to find the cracks in the foundation. And to find those cracks, you have to get your hands dirty. I waited until 3 in the morning. The house was silent. Carter and Brittany were upstairs asleep, dreaming of the millions they thought were coming. I crept down the hallway to the guest room. The room that used to be my study where I kept my blueprints and my drafting table. Now it was the Green Chain Global Headquarters. I didn't turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the beam low. I wasn't looking for digital files on his computer. Carter was too arrogant for firewalls, but I knew he lived his life on the cloud. I was looking for something more tangible, something he couldn't delete with a keystroke. I went straight for the trash can under the desk. There is a psychology to trash. People assume that once they let go of a piece of paper, it ceases to exist. They think the plastic liner of a bin is a magical void where secrets go to die. Especially men like Carter. Men who are so focused on the digital horizon that they forget the physical trail they leave behind. He thought I was too stupid to understand his business, and he thought Brittany was too submissive to check on him. That arrogance was his weakness. The bin was full of the remnants of his genius. Empty energy drink cans, high-protein bar wrappers, the detritus of a man running on caffeine and delusion. I sifted through it with latex gloves I had taken from under the sink. It was disgusting work. It was beneath me. But then again, I was just the gardener, wasn't I? And gardeners deal with dirt. Near the bottom, buried under a sticky coffee cup, I found a crumpled ball of paper. It wasn't shredded. Why would he shred it? He was the king of the castle. I smoothed it out on the desk, pressing it flat with my hand. It was a notice. But not just any notice. It was a final demand from a creditor. A collection agency I recognized. And then I saw the logo at the top. It was the same financial institution that had been featured on the news program I was watching yesterday. The trash show he had turned off. The show he said was for idiots. The irony washed over me like cold water. He hadn't turned off the TV because he hated antiques. He turned it off because the news ticker at the bottom of the screen was scrolling the names of companies under investigation by the SEC. And the parent company of this collection agency was on that list. He wasn't protecting my brain from garbage. He was protecting his own lie from exposure. I took a picture of the document. Then I dug deeper. And what I found next made the unpaid bill look like a birthday card. It was a draft of a loan application. A loan against the equity of my house. And at the bottom, where the homeowner's signature should be there, was a practice scrawl. He had been practicing my signature. He wasn't just a squatter. He was a thief. I carefully placed the papers back in the bin exactly how I found them. I turned off the flashlight. I had what I needed. The inspection was complete. The building was condemned. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours, the only light coming from the narrow beam of my flashlight. I had cleared a space on the mahogany desk, pushing aside Carter's gold-plated stapler and his framed photo of himself shaking hands with a local politician. Spread out before me was a jigsaw puzzle of financial ruin. I had taken the torn strips of paper I found at the bottom of the bin and carefully taped them back together on the back of an old blueprint. It was forensic engineering. I was reconstructing a collapse before it even happened. The first document was a bank statement for the corporate account of Green Chain Global. Carter had talked a big game about decentralized ledgers and mining algorithms, but the numbers on this paper told a much older, uglier story. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. I traced the lines with my finger, my nail following the flow of money, like water through a leaking pipe. Look at this entry here. May 12th. An incoming wire transfer of $50,000 from an investor named David Chen. I remembered David. He was the young man at the party who asked about scalability. 2 hours later on the same day, there was an outgoing transfer. Not to a server farm, not to a development team, but $45,000 sent directly to a luxury car dealership in Miami. The remaining $5,000 went to a high-end jewelry store in town. He wasn't investing their money. He was eating it. He was robbing Peter to pay for Paul's Porsche. I looked at the dates. The pattern was identical every single month. New money came in from fresh victims, and it was immediately siphoned out to pay for the lease on his sports car, the credit card bills for Brittany's designer wardrobe, and the catering for parties designed to lure in the next round of suckers. There was no product. There was no technology. Green Chain was nothing but a hollow shell painted gold. But as I dug deeper into the pile, the fraud became personal. I found a letter from a private lender, a hard money lender, the kind that charges 20% interest and breaks your legs if you miss a payment. Carter was in deep. He had borrowed $500,000 6 months ago to keep the illusion afloat, and now the balloon payment was due. The letter was aggressive. It mentioned legal action. It mentioned seizure of assets. And that is when I found it. The document that made my blood turn to ice. It was a loan application for a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit for $800,000. The collateral listed was my address. This house, the house I built, the house that was fully paid off 10 years ago. I stared at the paperwork, trying to understand the audacity of it. He couldn't mortgage a house he didn't own. The bank would require the owner's signature. I flipped to the last page of the application, and there it was. Wallace King. My name. Written in blue ink. I leaned closer, shining the light directly on the signature. It wasn't a crude forgery. It was a masterpiece. He had practiced. He had studied the way I crossed my T's and the specific loop of my W. He had captured the slight tremor in my handwriting that comes with age. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't been sitting there in the dark staring at it, I might have believed I signed it myself. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. This wasn't just about him being a bad businessman or a disrespectful son-in-law. This was a calculated attempt to steal my life. He was going to use my home, my sanctuary, to pay off his gambling debts and his failed scams. He was going to take the equity I had spent 40 years building and pour it into the black hole of his ego. And when the scheme inevitably collapsed, because they always collapse, the bank wouldn't come for him. They would come for me. They would take the house. They would kick me out onto the street at 67 years old. I looked at the date on the application. It was dated for tomorrow. He was planning to submit this in the morning. That was why he needed me out of the house. That was why he gave me the 30-day ultimatum. He needed me gone so the appraisers could come in without me asking questions. He needed the space to play the role of the owner one last time to close the deal. I sat back in the leather chair, the leather creaking softly in the silence. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was clarity. Absolute crystalline clarity. For 2 years, I had viewed Carter as a nuisance, a brat, a parasite that I tolerated for the sake of my daughter. But I was wrong. He wasn't a parasite. A parasite just feeds. Carter was a cancer. He was actively destroying the host. I looked at the signature again. Wallace King. He had stolen my name. He had stolen my trust. And he was moments away from stealing my legacy. I reached for my phone and took high-resolution photos of every single taped-together document. I photographed the bank statements showing the theft. I photographed the threatening letters from the loan sharks. And I took 10 different angles of the forged mortgage application. Then I did something Carter never expected. I opened my email. I didn't send these photos to the police. Not yet. The police are slow. They need warrants. They need procedures. I needed something faster. I needed a demolition crew. I attached the photos to an email addressed to Mr. Sterling, the investor with the shaved head, the man Carter was trying to close a deal with. I knew Sterling's reputation. I knew he was a man who did his due diligence, but everyone has blind spots. I was about to be his eyes. I typed a simple subject line, the structural integrity of Green Chain. In the body of the email I wrote, "Dear Mr. Sterling, you asked about the load-bearing capacity of this house. You should be asking about the load-bearing capacity of the man living in it. Attached is the financial blueprint of the investment you are about to make. It is built on sand, and it is about to slide into the ocean." I hit send. I watched the progress bar slide across the screen. Sent. I turned off the flashlight. I sat in the darkness listening to the house settle. Upstairs, Carter was sleeping, probably dreaming of the check Sterling would write him tomorrow. He didn't know that the ground beneath him had already opened up. He didn't know that the old gardener, the simple man who pruned the roses, had just cut the main root of his entire existence. I stood up and walked out of the office. I didn't go back to bed. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I needed to be awake. I needed to be sitting on the front porch drinking from my favorite mug when the world woke up. Because today wasn't just another day. Today was eviction day. But not for me. The overhead light flickered on, blinding me for a second. I didn't try to hide the papers. I didn't try to make an excuse. I just stood there holding the evidence of her husband's crimes in my hands. Brittany stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. But she wasn't angry at the thief. She was angry at the witness. "Dad, are you insane?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are digging through our trash like a rat. This is a federal offense, Dad. This is invasion of privacy. Carter was right about you. You are losing your mind." I tried to speak. I tried to lift the paper to show her the forgery. "Brittany, look at this," I started. No, she cut me off, stepping forward but refusing to look at the document. "I don't want to hear your paranoid delusions. You are toxic, Dad. You are jealous, and you are toxic. And I am not going to let you poison my son with your bitterness anymore." She took a deep breath, delivering the blow she knew would hurt the most. "From this moment on, you are forbidden from seeing Leo. I don't want you near him. I don't want you speaking to him. You are a bad influence, and until you get professional help, you are a stranger to this family." She slammed the door, leaving me alone in the silence. My hand, which had been steady while holding the evidence, finally began to tremble. She had weaponized my grandson. She had used the only innocent thing left in this house as a bargaining chip to protect a criminal. I looked at the forged signature one last time. They wanted war. They just got it. I wasn't going to wait 30 days. I wasn't even going to wait for the sun to come up. The eviction notice was getting filed today. The silence in the kitchen that morning was thick enough to choke on. Carter didn't say a word to me. He just grabbed his protein shake, checked his reflection in the microwave door, and walked out whistling. He actually whistled. It was the sound of a man who thought he had already won. Brittany wouldn't even look at me. She kept her eyes glued to her phone, ushering Leo out the door for school without a single goodbye. They treated me like a piece of furniture that was scheduled for removal. They thought the 30-day clock had just started ticking. They had no idea that the countdown had already hit 0. As soon as their luxury SUV disappeared around the bend of the driveway, I didn't sit down to cry. I didn't pace the floor in anxiety. I went to work. I am an engineer, and when a building is condemned, You secure the perimeter immediately. I picked up the phone and dialed a security firm I had worked with on commercial projects. I didn't ask for a standard lock change. I asked for a fortress upgrade. I told them I wanted the irony special. Carter had spent 2 years lecturing me about the importance of smart technology, about how keys were archaic relics of the past. So I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. By noon, the old brass deadbolts, the ones I had installed when Brittany was a baby, were gone. In their place sat sleek, matte black biometric scanners, military grade. They required a fingerprint to open. And not just any fingerprint. Mine. I programmed the system myself. I entered my thumbprint, then my index finger. The machine beeped a cheerful high-tech confirmation. Access granted. Wallace King, sole administrator. I looked at the empty slots for other users. User 2, User 3. I left them blank. Then came the packing. A younger man might have thrown their clothes out the window. An angrier man might have burned them. But I am not angry anymore. I am efficient. I bought 50 heavy-duty moving boxes. I went room by room methodically dismantling their lives. I started in the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room they had taken over. I stripped the sheets off the bed. I took Carter's Italian suits out of the closet. I folded them neatly. I didn't wrinkle a single shirt. I packed Brittany's designer shoes pair by pair. I packed the expensive watches Carter bought with stolen money. I packed the collection of high-end skincare products Brittany used to hide the stress of her lie. I sealed every box with industrial tape. I took a thick black marker and wrote on the side of each one. Carter, Brittany, office, bathroom. It wasn't an act of rage. It was an act of erasure. With every box I taped shut, I was removing their trace from my sanctuary. I was reclaiming my square footage. By 4 o'clock, the house was empty of their presence. The air felt lighter. I carted the boxes out to the front porch, stacking them in a neat, impenetrable wall right in front of the main entrance. It looked like a barricade. It looked like a border wall. I placed the last box on top, a box containing the espresso machine Carter loved so much. I placed it gently. I didn't want it to break. I wanted him to see it. I stood back and looked at my work. The house was silent again, but this time it was a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a structure that was finally stable again. I went inside, closed the heavy front door, and listened to the electronic lock engage. Click, whir, thud. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. I went to the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee in my old drip machine, and sat in the living room facing the window, waiting. The show was about to begin. 6 o'clock arrived with the punctuality of a Swiss train. I was sitting in my armchair by the window, the heavy velvet curtains drawn back just enough to give me a clear view of the driveway. My hands were wrapped around a mug of hot coffee, the ceramic warm against my palms. It was the only warmth in the room. Inside me, everything was cold. It was the cold calculation of a man who had checked the safety valves, secured the perimeter, and was now waiting for the pressure test to begin. I saw the headlights of their leased SUV cut through the twilight before I heard the engine. Carter drove like he owned the road, swinging the heavy vehicle into the driveway, with a speed that suggested he was important, that his time was more valuable than anyone else's safety. He parked askew, taking up 2 spaces as usual. I watched him step out of the car. He was on his phone, of course. He was gesturing wildly, probably lying to another investor about money he didn't have. Brittany climbed out of the passenger side, looking exhausted, dragging her feet as she walked toward the trunk to get her yoga bag. They didn't see the wall of boxes at first. The porch light was off. I had left it off on purpose. I wanted them to walk all the way up the steps. I wanted them to reach for the door handle before reality hit them. Carter walked up first, still talking loud enough for me to hear through the glass. Yeah, just send the wire transfer tonight. My father-in-law is signing the collateral agreement first thing in the morning. It is a done deal. He reached the top step and stopped mid-sentence. His phone slowly lowered from his ear. In the dim light of the street lamps, I saw him squinting. He was looking at the barricade. 50 boxes stacked 5 feet high, blocking the entire width of the entrance, the fortress of cardboard I had built. I saw his mouth move. He was asking Brittany a question. She walked up beside him and froze. She recognized the boxes. She recognized the handwriting on the side. I saw her hand fly to her mouth. She knew. In that instant, she knew exactly what had happened. But Carter was still in denial. His arrogance was a shield that reality had not yet pierced. He pushed one of the boxes aside, roughly knocking it over. It was a box of his shoes. They spilled out onto the concrete. He stepped over them and marched to the door. He didn't look at the new lock. He didn't notice the matte black finish of the biometric scanner. He just did what he always did. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his key, and jammed it toward the keyhole. But there was no keyhole. I heard the metal of his key scrape uselessly against the hardened steel faceplate of the smart lock. Scratch. Scratch. Silence. He pulled the key back, looked at it, and then looked at the door. He tried again. Harder this time, as if force could create a hole where there was none. Then he saw the scanner, the small glowing red ring that waited for a fingerprint. He laughed. I could see his shoulders shake. It was a nervous, confused laugh. He probably thought I had installed it as a surprise gift, a smart home upgrade. He pressed his thumb against the glass. The lock let out a sharp, angry buzz. Access denied. The red light flashed twice. He tried his index finger. Buzz. Access denied. He tried his middle finger. Buzz. Access denied. I took a sip of my coffee. The show was escalating right on schedule. Carter turned to the window. He couldn't see me clearly through the glare and the sheer curtains, but he knew I was there. He started pounding on the glass. "Wallace," he shouted. "Open this door. The battery is dead or something. The stupid system you bought is broken." I didn't move. I didn't acknowledge him. I just sat there, a silhouette of judgment. Brittany was crying now. She was pulling at his arm, trying to tell him something, but he shoved her away. He was starting to panic. The reality was setting in. His key didn't work. His fingerprint didn't work. And the boxes behind him were filled with his life. He ran back to the door and started kicking it. This was the moment from the teaser. The moment where the civilized veneer cracked and the animal came out. He threw his whole body weight against the solid oak. Thud. 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 The door didn't budge. I had reinforced the frame with steel strikers years ago. He could kick until his leg broke. That door was not opening. "Open the door, you old lunatic," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is my house. You can't lock me out. I have rights." Lights flickered on in the house across the street. Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood watch captain, pulled back her curtains. I knew she would be watching. I was counting on it. Carter was making a spectacle of himself, and in our neighborhood, a spectacle meant one thing: the police. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, the blue and red lights washed over the living room walls. I didn't call them. Mrs. Higgins did. Or maybe Carter did. It didn't matter. They were here. 2 cruisers pulled up to the curb. Carter ran down the driveway, waving his arms like a man drowning. He met the officers halfway, pointing back at the house, screaming, acting the victim. I stood up then. It was time for Act 2. I walked to the security monitor in the hallway. I could see everything through the camera mounted above the doorbell. I could hear every word clearly through the microphone. "Officer, thank God you are here. Carter panted, his tie undone, his face sweating. "You have to help us. It is my father-in-law. He is inside. He has locked us out." The officer, a tall man with a calm demeanor, looked at the pile of boxes. "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes." "Yes, it is my residence," Carter yelled. "Look, my stuff is all here." He threw it out. "But that is not the worst part. He is sick, officer. He is very sick." I leaned closer to the monitor. Here it comes. The lie. "He has advanced Alzheimer's." Carter said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, trying to sound like a concerned relative. "We have been trying to get him into a care facility, but he is resisting. He is having a psychotic episode. He doesn't know who we are. He thinks we are intruders. He has trapped himself inside, and he is dangerous. He could hurt himself. You need to break down the door. You need to get him out of there before he burns the place down." Brittany stood behind him, sobbing into her hands. She nodded. She actually nodded. She was backing up his lie. She was willing to label her own father, a man with a mind sharper than a diamond cutter, as a senile invalid just to get back into the house and save their scheme. The officer looked at the house, then back at Carter. He put his hand on his radio. "Dispatch, we have a possible 5150 at the King residence. Elderly male, possible dementia, barricaded inside. Requesting backup and medical." My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage. They were trying to take my freedom. They were weaponizing the police to drag me out in a straitjacket so they could regain control of the assets. It was a brilliant, evil move. If I yelled or fought, I would prove them right. If I stayed silent, they would break the door down. I had to play this perfectly. I walked to the door. I didn't open it. I pressed the button on the intercom system. My voice boomed out of the speaker on the porch, loud, clear, and steady. It cut through the night air, silencing Carter's frantic rambling. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "My name is Wallace King. I am the sole owner of this property. I do not have Alzheimer's. I am fully lucid. And I am currently watching you on a 4K security camera." Carter jumped. He spun around to look at the speaker. "Don't listen to him. He is confusing us with people from his past. He doesn't know what year it is." I continued, ignoring Carter completely. "Officer, the man shouting at you is Carter Vance. The woman is my daughter, Brittany. They are not residents here. They are guests whose invitation has been revoked due to criminal misconduct." "Criminal misconduct?" the officer asked, looking at Carter with suspicion. "Yes," I replied. "Domestic abuse, elder abuse, and attempted grand larceny. I have terminated their stay for my own safety. If you would be so kind as to check the deed to the house, you will find my name on it. And if you check the boxes on the porch, you will find their belongings. I have not evicted them illegally. I have simply removed their access to my home after they threatened me." Carter turned purple. "That is a lie. He is lying. He is crazy. Break the door down." The officer held up a hand to silence Carter. He walked up to the camera. "Sir, can you come out so we can talk?" I paused. This was the gamble. If I opened the door, Carter might rush in. "I do not feel safe opening the door with that man present, officer," I said. "However, I have a document taped to the inside of the front window. It is a copy of the temporary housing agreement they signed 2 years ago. Clause 4 states that any act of aggression or theft nullifies their residency immediately. Please shine your flashlight on the window to the left of the door." The officer stepped over the boxes and shone his light on the window. There, taped against the glass, was the contract I had made them sign, and right next to it I had taped the printout of the forged mortgage application with Carter's fake signature practicing my name. The officer leaned in. He read the contract. Then he looked at the forgery. He looked for a long time. When he turned back to Carter, his hand wasn't on his radio anymore. It was resting near his handcuffs. "Mr. Vance," the officer said, his voice dropping an octave. "Step away from the door." "No," Carter screamed. "You are not listening. That paper is fake. He made it up. He is the crazy one, sir. Step away from the door." Now the officer commanded, his hand snapping to his holster. Carter lunged. Not at the officer, but at the door. He was desperate. He threw himself at the wood, screaming my name, clawing at the biometric lock like a wild animal. The police didn't hesitate. 2 officers grabbed him. He fought back. He swung a fist. That was his final mistake. I watched on the monitor as they slammed him against the hood of the cruiser. I watched them twist his arms behind his back. I heard the click of the handcuffs. Brittany screamed, running toward them, but another officer held her back. "I am not crazy," Carter was howling as they shoved him into the back of the car. "I am a CEO. I am a visionary. You can't do this to me." I pressed the intercom button one last time. "Carter," I said. My voice was soft, but it carried. "The code to the lock wasn't broken. I just deleted you from the system. Goodbye." I turned off the monitor. Outside, the blue and red lights were still flashing, but the banging had stopped. The silence returned. I walked back to my chair, picked up my coffee, and took a sip. It was cold now. But that was fine. I didn't mind the cold. It helped me think. And I had a lot of thinking to do before the sun came up and the real legal battle began. The officer lowered his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness one last time before clicking off. He turned to Carter, his face hard and unamused. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice cutting through the night air like a knife. "I have read the document. It is a notarized temporary housing agreement. And it seems you signed it." Carter started to stammer. "I didn't read the fine print." "He tricked me." The officer shook his head. "Ignorance of a contract is not a defense, sir. Clause 4 is very clear. The homeowner reserves the right to terminate residency immediately in the event of verbal assault or defamation. And considering you just spent 20 minutes screaming that Mr. King is insane in front of his neighbors, I would say you have violated that clause." The officer pointed toward the SUV. "You are trespassing. Take your boxes and leave. If you step foot on this porch again tonight, you will be arrested." Carter looked at the officer, then at the unyielding black door. He knew he was beaten. But a rat is most dangerous when it is cornered. He grabbed a box of his clothes and threw it into the back of his car. He dragged Brittany by the arm, shoving her into the passenger seat. Before he got in, he turned and looked directly into the security camera. He knew I was watching. He leaned in close, his face distorted by a rage so pure it looked like madness. "You think you won, Wallace?" he screamed, spitting on the driveway. "You think a piece of paper protects you? This isn't over. I am going to sue you for everything you have. I will have you declared mentally incompetent. I will have you thrown into the worst state asylum I can find, and I will leave you there to rot. You will die alone in a padded room, old man. You hear me, alone?" He slammed the car door so hard the windows rattled. The engine roared, and they sped off into the night. I watched them go. I took a deep breath. He thought he was threatening me, but he was just walking into the trap. He wanted a court battle excellent, because I had evidence that would make a judge put him away for a lot longer than a night. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in desperation. A rational man, after being escorted off a property by the police, would have retreated. He would have reflected on his mistakes. But Carter was not a rational man. He was a gambler who had just lost his entire stack, and instead of walking away from the table, he decided to bet his life on one final reckless bluff. He didn't go to a hotel to sleep. He went hunting for money. I found out later through Sullivan that Carter had visited a payday lender in the gritty part of town, a place that didn't ask questions about credit scores as long as you were willing to sign away your soul at 40% interest. He walked out of there with a briefcase of cash and a look of manic determination. He used that money not to find a new apartment, but to hire a weapon. His name was Marcus Finch. Finch was the kind of attorney you hired when you were guilty, but wanted to destroy the opposition so thoroughly that the truth didn't matter. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit, known for tearing families apart in probate court. Carter wasn't interested in a fair settlement. He wanted a scorched earth policy. On Tuesday morning, a process server knocked on my new reinforced door. He handed me a thick envelope through the mail slot. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. It was a declaration of war. I took the papers to the kitchen table and spread them out next to my coffee. Reading them was like looking into a funhouse mirror where every truth was twisted into a grotesque lie. Carter and Finch hadn't just sued for illegal eviction. That would have been too simple. No, they had constructed a narrative so detailed, so venomous, that it almost commanded respect for its sheer audacity. The lawsuit claimed that I, Wallace King, was suffering from advanced aggressive dementia. It painted a picture of a man who had lost his grip on reality. They took the incident with the antique show and described it as a violent episode where I hallucinated that the television was attacking me. They took my gardening work, the work Carter had forced me to do, and described it as wandering behavior, claiming I was found confused and disoriented in the bushes, believing I was a servant from another century. But the most painful part wasn't the lies about my mind. It was the lies about my character. They claimed I was a danger to myself and others. They cited my installation of the biometric locks, not as a security measure, but as evidence of extreme paranoia and imprisonment. They said I had trapped them inside the house for weeks, subjecting them to psychological torture before finally locking them out in a fit of senile rage. And then came the solution, the legal remedy they were seeking. It wasn't money, not directly. It was control. The document was a petition for emergency conservatorship. They were asking the court to strip me of my rights. They wanted to take away my ability to manage my own finances, my own health care, and my own property. And who was the proposed guardian? Who was the benevolent soul stepping up to take care of this poor, broken old man, Brittany Vance? My daughter. I stared at her name typed in bold letters. Brittany. The girl I had carried on my shoulders. The girl whose tuition I had paid. The girl who had stood by silently while her husband humiliated me. Now she wasn't just silent. She was an active participant. She had signed an affidavit swearing that her father was mentally incompetent. She was asking the state to hand her the keys to my life so she could legally sell my house, pay off her husband's debts, and put me in a facility where I couldn't interfere with their future. It was a brilliant strategy. If they won, the eviction would be overturned. Carter would move back in as the caretaker. They would have access to my bank accounts. They would have everything they wanted, and they would look like heroes for taking care of a sick parent. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach. It wasn't fear. It was the final death of hope. Until that moment, a small, foolish part of me had hoped Brittany would wake up. I hoped she would leave him. But seeing her signature on that page killed that hope. She had made her choice. She chose the parasite over the host. I picked up my phone and called Sullivan. Sully, I said, my voice steady. They filed. They are going for guardianship. I know, Wallace Sullivan replied, his voice grim. Finch just faxed over the motion. They are pushing for an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. They are claiming imminent danger to your assets. They want to freeze your accounts before you can spend any more money. Let them try, I said. Wallace Sullivan warned. You need to be prepared. In court tomorrow, they are going to come at you hard. They are going to try to make you lose your temper. They want the judge to see an angry, unstable old man. If you snap even for a second, we lose. Finch is a master at baiting people. I looked at the empty chair where Brittany used to sit for breakfast. I thought about the forged mortgage application safe in my pocket. I thought about the lie they had built on a foundation of sand. "Don't worry, Sully," I said. "I won't snap. I am an engineer. I don't break under pressure. I just redirect the load. Let them build their case. Let them stack the lies as high as they want. The higher they build it, the harder it falls. I will see you in court." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a smell I associated with speeding tickets and jury duty, not the dismantling of my entire life. I sat at the defendant's table next to Sullivan. Across the aisle, Carter and Brittany sat with Marcus Finch. They looked like a tableau of grieving relatives at a funeral. Brittany was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed her makeup remained perfectly intact. Carter wore a somber navy suit, his head bowed in practiced humility. But it was Finch who drew the eye. He moved around the courtroom like a panther circling a wounded deer, his voice smooth, projected, and dripping with false concern. Your Honor, Finch began resting his hands on the podium and looking directly at Judge Reynolds. "We are not here today to discuss a property dispute. If this were merely about a house, we would be in civil court. No. We are here to discuss a tragedy. We are here to discuss the rapid and heartbreaking cognitive decline of Mr. Wallace King." I felt Sullivan's hand on my arm, a silent warning to keep my face neutral. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the wood grain of the judge's bench. Finch continued pacing slowly toward the witness stand, where he had called Brittany to testify. He treated her gently, like she was made of glass. "Mrs. Vance, could you please describe for the court the incident that occurred 2 nights ago, the incident involving the trash?" Brittany sniffed, her voice trembling just enough to sound brave. "It was about 3 in the morning. I heard a noise downstairs. I thought maybe Dad had fallen. He wanders at night sometimes. When I went down to the study, I found him." She paused, letting a fresh tear slide down her cheek. "I found him on his knees. He had overturned the garbage bin. He was digging through the trash, Your Honor. He was uncrumpling dirty napkins, candy wrappers, old receipts. He was talking to himself." Finch shook his head sadly. "And did he recognize you?" Mrs. Vance Brittany looked at me then. For a second, her mask slipped, and I saw the cold calculation in her eyes. But then she looked back at the judge, her face crumbling into sorrow. "No." He looked right at me and started screaming about spies. He said we were stealing his blueprints. He accused my husband of being a thief. It was terrifying. He wasn't my father in that moment. He was a stranger, lies. Every word was a meticulously crafted lie designed to turn my investigative work into a symptom of madness. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand up and shout that I was looking for evidence of fraud. I wanted to scream that the only thief in the room was the man sitting next to her. But I knew that an outburst would only prove their point. An engineer does not scream at a failing beam. He reinforces it. Finch turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not an isolated incident. We have sworn affidavits from the guests at a party the family hosted recently. They witnessed Mr. King wandering the grounds in dirty overalls, confusing himself with the hired help. He spilled wine on guests. He ranted about structural physics that didn't exist. These are classic signs of advanced dementia, paranoia, disorientation, loss of identity." He walked over to his table and picked up a document. It was a photo of my front door, the door with the biometric lock. And then Finch said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "Then comes the violence. The lockdown. Mr. King didn't just change the locks, Your Honor. He installed a military-grade biometric security system. He programmed it to reject his own family. He barricaded the entrance with heavy boxes. This is siege mentality. He trapped himself inside that house because he believes the world is out to get him. And in his confusion, he threw his daughter and her husband out onto the street in the middle of the night." Finch slammed the photo down on the railing. "This is not a landlord evicting tenants. This is a sick man who has become a danger to himself and others. We are terrified that he will leave the gas on. We are terrified he will hurt himself. That is why we are asking for emergency conservatorship. Not to take his money, but to save his life. Mrs. Vance simply wants to bring her father home to a facility where he can get the care he needs. The judge looked at me. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Finch spun a compelling story. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed him too. Sullivan stood up then. He was a different kind of lawyer than Finch. He was older, slower, less theatrical. He didn't pace. He just stood there adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor," Sullivan said, his voice gravelly and calm. "Mr. Finch tells a very dramatic story. But drama is not evidence, and tears are not facts." Sullivan walked over to the exhibit table. He picked up the same photo of the door that Finch had used. "Mr. Finch calls this a siege," Sullivan said. "I call it a security upgrade. Mr. Finch calls my client paranoid. I call him observant. Because the question we should be asking is not why Mr. King was looking through the trash. The question is, what did he find there?" Carter shifted in his seat. I saw him whisper something to Finch. Finch frowned. Sullivan continued ignoring them. "We are hearing a lot about Mr. King's mental state, but we haven't heard a single word about the plaintiff's financial state. We haven't heard why a successful CEO like Mr. Vance needs to live in his father-in-law's house for 2 years rent-free. We haven't heard why Mrs. Vance, who claims to be so worried about her father's health, never took him to a doctor until the day he threatened to evict them." "Objection," Finch barked. "Relevance. We are here to discuss the competency of Mr. King, not the finances of my clients. It goes to motivation, Your Honor." Sullivan shot back, his voice sharpening. "If Mr. King is declared incompetent, who controls his estate? Who controls the house? Who controls the bank accounts?" The judge nodded. "Overruled. I will allow it. Proceed, Mr. Sullivan." Sullivan turned to look at me. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was time. He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff claims my client is imagining things. They claim he is hallucinating thieves and spies. But as the old saying goes, just because you are paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. Mr. King wasn't digging in the trash because he is crazy. He was digging in the trash because he suspected that his son-in-law was using his identity to commit bank fraud." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Carter's face went pale. Brittany stopped crying instantly. Sullivan picked up a folder from our table, the folder containing the photos I had taken. "Mr. Finch wants to paint a picture of a senile old man. I am about to paint a picture of a whistleblower. Before we proceed with any psychological evaluation, I would like to submit into evidence these photographs taken by Mr. King on the night in question. They do not show candy wrappers. They show a mortgage application for $800,000 against Mr. King's home. An application dated for today. An application signed by Wallace King." Sullivan paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "The problem, Your Honor, is that Mr. King never signed this document." Finch jumped up. "Objection. This is ambush. We haven't seen this evidence. You haven't seen it because your client tried to hide it in the garbage," Sullivan said calmly. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Bring that up here, Mr. Sullivan." As Sullivan walked toward the bench with the folder, I looked at Carter. The smugness was gone. The arrogance had evaporated. In its place was the raw, naked fear of a man watching the walls close in. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched him studying the structural failure of his lies. The pressure was mounting. And just like a bridge built on bad concrete, he was about to crack. Judge Reynolds took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at me not with the harshness of a magistrate, but with the pity of a granddaughter looking at a confused elder. That pity was worse than anger. It meant she believed them. It meant Carter's performance had worked. She reached for her gavel, her other hand hovering over the court order that would strip me of my freedom. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice soft but final. "Based on the testimony regarding the defendant's erratic behavior and the potential danger to himself, I am inclined to grant the motion for an emergency psychological evaluation. We cannot risk Mr. King's safety while we debate the finer points of eviction law." Carter squeezed Brittany's hand under the table. I saw a tiny triumphant smile tug at the corner of his mouth. He had done it. He had weaponized the legal system to lock me away so he could loot my estate. But before the gavel could strike the wood, Sullivan stood up. He didn't jump. He rose slowly like a mountain rising from the mist. He buttoned his suit jacket with a deliberate heavy motion that commanded the room's attention. "Your Honor," Sullivan boomed, his voice filling the silence. "You are about to make a ruling based on the premise that my client is losing his mind. But I beseech you to pause, because if you sign that order, you are not protecting a sick man. You are aiding and abetting a robbery." The judge froze. The gavel hovered in midair. The smile vanished from Carter's face instantly. Sullivan walked to the center of the aisle, ignoring the furious glare from Finch. "We have heard extensive fairy tales about my client's mental health, but we have not heard a single fact about the plaintiff's financial health. Before you question Mr. King's sanity, I demand that we question Mr. Vance's solvency, because this is not a conservatorship case, Your Honor. This is a bank heist in progress, and the weapon they are using is this court." Sullivan slammed his hand down on the pile of evidence we had brought. "I have proof that the plaintiff has forged my client's signature on a mortgage application that is currently pending approval. If you send Mr. King away today, that loan goes through tomorrow, and that is the only reason we are standing here." The judge slowly lowered her gavel, but she didn't bang it. She looked at Carter, her eyes narrowing into slits of suspicion. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous temperature. "Explain this. Now." Mr. Finch tried to speak. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then adjusted his tie. For the first time since the hearing began, the slick, confident predator looked like prey. He looked at Carter, but Carter was staring at the table, his face a mask of ash-gray terror. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb squad watching a timer count down to 0. Sullivan did not wait for an answer. He walked back to our table and picked up a heavy stack of documents. These were not just the photos I had taken. These were the results of the background check I had told him to run the moment I saw the bank logo in the trash. Sullivan approached the bench, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, like the tolling of a bell. "Your Honor," Sullivan began, his voice low and dangerous. "Mr. Finch has spent the last hour telling you a story about a confused old man digging through garbage, but he forgot to ask the most important question. What exactly was in that garbage, because it wasn't candy wrappers. It was the paper trail of a felony." Sullivan placed the first pile of papers on the judge's bench. Exhibit A. These are the bank statements for Green Chain Global, the company Mr. Vance claims is a revolutionary fintech startup. My client recovered these from the trash bin in his own home. If you look at the highlighted transactions, you will see a pattern. Money comes in from private investors, and within hours it is transferred out to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. There is no payroll. There is no research and development. There is no business. This is a classic shell game. The judge flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. Finch stood up. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. My client's business practices are not on trial here." "They are irrelevant," Sullivan roared, spinning around to face him. "They are the entire motive, because Exhibit B will show you exactly why Mr. Vance is so desperate to seize control of my client's assets." Sullivan slammed the second pile down. Your Honor, after my client alerted me to the irregularities, I took the liberty of contacting a friend at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It turns out Mr. Vance is already on their radar. Green Chain Global is currently the subject of an active undercover investigation for money laundering. Those investors Mr. Vance has been courting, they are not venture capitalists. They are fronts for a syndicate known for loan sharking. A gasp went through the courtroom. Brittany covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. She pulled her hand away from Carter's as if he had burned her. Carter didn't move. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the weight of the truth. Sullivan continued, his voice relentless. Mr. Vance didn't just borrow money to start a business. He borrowed money to pay off gambling debts. And when the scheme collapsed, as Ponzi schemes always do, he found himself owing $500,000 to people who do not send collection letters. They send broken bones, and they gave him a deadline. Sullivan pointed a finger at me, but his eyes were on the judge. That brings us to Exhibit C, the timeline. The deadline for Mr. Vance's payment is this Friday. That is 48 hours from now, and that, Your Honor, is why we are here. Mr. Vance doesn't care about his father-in-law's health. He doesn't want to put Mr. King in a nursing home to keep him safe. He wants to put him away to get him out of the house. Because the moment Mr. King is declared incompetent, Mr. Vance, through his wife, gains power of attorney. Sullivan leaned in close to the bench, lowering his voice to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. His plan was simple. Lock the old man up. The old man. Sell the house to a cash buyer immediately. Take the equity. Pay off the mob. And leave his wife and father-in-law with nothing but a devastating betrayal. This wasn't a conservatorship petition, Your Honor. This was a liquidation sale. And my client was the inventory. The judge looked up from the documents. Her face was pale. She looked at Carter Vance. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. Is this true? Are you under federal investigation? Carter tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to fail him. I can explain. Your Honor, it is a misunderstanding. The funds they are in transit. It is complex. You wouldn't understand the blockchain. Sit down, the judge barked. She turned her gaze to Brittany. Mrs. Vance, did you know about this? Did you know your husband was planning to sell your father's home to pay off a criminal debt? Brittany stood up slowly. She looked at the documents on the bench. She looked at me sitting stoically at the defense table, and then she looked at the man she had married, the man she had defended, the man she had chosen over her own blood. Carter, she whispered, you told me the business was booming. You told me Dad was sick. You told me we were doing this to help him. Carter grabbed her arm. Brittany, don't listen to them. They are twisting everything. We need the money, yes, but I can fix it. I just need a little more time. Just stick to the script. Tell her your father is crazy. Please. Brittany looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked at his face. For the first time in 2 years, the fog seemed to lift. She saw the sweat on his forehead. She saw the panic in his eyes. She saw the monster behind the mask. He is not crazy, Brittany said, her voice trembling but clear. She pulled her arm away from him. My father isn't crazy. I am the one who was crazy. I believed you. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I withdraw my petition. I withdraw my affidavit. My father is perfectly sane. And she took a deep breath, pointing a shaking finger at Carter. And I think I would like to speak to a divorce lawyer. Order. The judge slammed her gavel down as the courtroom erupted. Finch was frantically trying to stack his papers, looking for an exit. Carter was shouting, begging Brittany to come back. But I didn't look at them. I looked at Sullivan. He gave me a small, tired nod. We had done it. The beams had held. The stress test was over. But as I watched the chaos unfold, I knew the real payoff was yet to come. Because just as the judge was about to issue her ruling, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. And the men walking in weren't bailiffs. They were wearing windbreakers with 3 yellow letters printed on the back. FBI. The FBI agents moved to secure the exits, but they didn't arrest Carter immediately. They stood back, allowing the courtroom drama to reach its natural, devastating conclusion. Carter looked like a man who had been shot, but hadn't realized he was bleeding yet. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, his eyes darting frantically from the judge to Sullivan to me. He was looking for a lifeline. He was looking for a way to spin this. And then he found it. Or at least he thought he found it. He straightened his tie. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pointed a shaking finger at me. "It doesn't matter," Carter stammered, his voice rising in pitch. "It doesn't matter if the company is in trouble. Wallace is still incompetent. He is still senile. And as his legal guardian, which I should be, I would still have access to his personal savings." He turned to Brittany, desperation clawing at his throat. "Brittany, tell them. Your father has a pension fund. He has savings accounts. He has a portfolio worth over $1 million. Even if Green Chain fails, we can use his money to pay off the debt. We can save ourselves. We just need to get control of his accounts." The judge looked disgusted, but Carter didn't care. He was drowning, and he was willing to use my life savings as a life raft. I stood up then. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for Sullivan. I walked around the table and stood in the center of the aisle just a few feet away from him. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see the clarity in my eyes. "Carter," I said. My voice was soft, barely a whisper, but in the silent courtroom it sounded like thunder. "Do you remember Tuesday night?" Carter blinked, confused by the question. "What Tuesday night?" I repeated. "You walked into the living room. I was sitting in my armchair. You walked over to the television and you pulled the plug. You told me I was watching trash. You said, and I quote, 'In this house we watch smart things.' You said I was filling my brain with garbage from the past." Carter stared at me. "Yeah, so what? You were watching that stupid antique show. It proves my point. You are living in the past." I smiled. It was a cold, wintry smile. "No, Carter. That is where you are wrong. I wasn't watching the antique show. The commercial break had just ended. I had flipped the channel to the financial news network." Carter froze. "The trash you told me to stop watching. That was a special report on emerging market fraud. And do you know what was scrolling across the bottom of the screen in the breaking news ticker?" I took a step closer. "It was a warning from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A warning about a company called Green Chain Global." I saw the color drain from his face completely. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You were so busy being arrogant," I continued, my voice hardening. "You were so busy trying to look smart that you missed the warning sign standing right in front of your face. You turned off the TV because you didn't want to see the truth. But I saw it, and because I saw it, I did what any good engineer does when he sees a structural fracture. I evacuated the building." Carter whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. What do you mean?" "I mean that I didn't just sit there," I said. "I mean that 3 months ago, when I first noticed that your lifestyle didn't match your income, I started making moves. But Tuesday night was the final confirmation." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a bank receipt. It was small, folded, and unassuming. I held it up. "You are fighting so hard for guardianship because you think you are going to get access to my retirement fund. You think you are going to get my life savings to pay off your loan sharks." I let the receipt drop from my hand. It fluttered to the floor, landing near his expensive Italian shoes. But there is nothing to access Carter. I emptied the accounts. Brittany gasped. Carter looked at the receipt on the floor as if it were a poisonous snake. I went to the bank yesterday morning, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I closed my savings account. I liquidated my stock portfolio. I emptied the pension fund. Every single cent I have earned in 40 years of hard work is gone. It is not in a bank you can touch. It is not in an account you can freeze. It is sitting in an irrevocable trust managed by a firm in another state with strict instructions that not a single penny can be withdrawn without my biometric authorization. Carter collapsed into his chair. He looked small. He looked broken. So even if you win here, Carter, even if the judge declares me insane right now, you get nothing. You are trying to rob a vault that has already been emptied. I leaned in close, delivering the final blow. You called me a relic. You said I was obsolete. But this relic was 3 steps ahead of you the entire time. You are not just going to prison, son. You are going to prison destitute. You have no money for lawyers. You have no money for bail. And you certainly have no money to pay back the people who are coming to break your legs. I turned my back on him. I looked at the judge who was watching me with a look of pure respect. Your Honor, I said, I am ready for my psychological evaluation now, but I think you will find that my mind is perfectly sharp. The courtroom erupted, but I didn't hear the noise. All I heard was the sound of a heavy burden falling from my shoulders. It was over. The collapse was controlled. The demolition was complete, and I was still standing amidst the dust, unbowed and unbroken. The chaos that followed was swift and brutal. 2 agents in windbreakers moved with practiced efficiency, flanking Carter before he could even take a step toward the exit. He didn't fight. He slumped the air, leaving his body as if he were a balloon that had finally popped. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room, louder than the gavel, louder than the murmurs of the gallery. Brittany stood frozen, like a statue of regret carved from ice. She watched the man she had idolized, the man she had betrayed her own blood for, being read his rights like a common criminal. The illusion of the genius CEO shattered right before her eyes, leaving only a trembling con artist in a cheap suit. Then came the moment I had anticipated. She turned to me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, pleading for a lifeline. She took a stumbling step in my direction, reaching out a hand. Dad, she whispered, her voice cracking with the sudden, terrifying realization that she was alone. Dad, please. I didn't know. Help me. She wanted the safety net. She wanted the father who had always fixed her mistakes to step in and make the bad men go away. But that father wasn't in the courtroom today. Only the structural engineer remained. And the engineer knew that you cannot save a building that has already collapsed. I didn't speak. I didn't scold her. I didn't even stop. I simply adjusted my coat, signaled to Sullivan, and turned my back on her tears. As the agents dragged her husband out the side door, I walked straight down the center aisle toward the exit. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me with a final satisfying thud, shutting out her cries and sealing the chapter on my past life. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, took a deep breath of fresh air, and hailed a cab. I was homeless, technically, but for the first time in years, I felt completely at home. The legal system did not waste time with Carter Vance. When the FBI finds a paper trail, that clear plea bargains happen quickly, but mercy does not. He was sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. The judge called him a predator in a suit. I heard that when they took him away, he was still trying to explain blockchain to the bailiff, as if talking fast enough could unlock the cell door. But prison is the one place where a smooth tongue cannot fix a broken reality. He was gone, erased from society, leaving behind nothing but a crater where a family used to be. For Brittany, the nightmare was just beginning. She wasn't wearing handcuffs, but she was shackled just the same. She learned a very hard lesson about the fine print of marriage that week. In her blind devotion to her husband's genius, she had co-signed everything. Every loan application, every lease agreement, every credit card limit increase. She had signed them all without reading, just like she had watched him turn off my television without asking why. She thought she was signing up for a life of luxury. In reality, she was signing a confession of debt. The fallout was absolute. The government doesn't just take the criminal's money. They take the proceeds of the crime. And since Carter had poured every stolen cent into their lifestyle, everything they had was considered evidence. I wasn't there to see it, but Sullivan told me. He told me about the morning the asset forfeiture team arrived at the temporary apartment they had been renting. They took the designer furniture. They took the electronics. They even took the jewelry Carter had bought her for their anniversary, because it was purchased with laundered funds. Then came the creditors. The people Carter owed money to were not the kind to forgive and forget. Since Carter was in prison and had no assets, they turned their hungry eyes toward the co-signer, Brittany. They garnished her wages before she even had a job. They froze her personal bank accounts. She discovered that she owed over $400,000 in personal guarantees for a business that never existed. She lost the SUV first. A repo truck hooked it up in the middle of the day while she was trying to drive to a job interview. She was left standing on the sidewalk in her expensive heels, watching her last mode of transportation disappear down the street. Then came the eviction from the apartment. With no credit, no husband, and a frozen bank account, she was a liability no landlord wanted. Her friends, the social climbers she had tried so hard to impress with my house and Carter's lies, vanished like smoke. They didn't return her calls. They blocked her number. To them, poverty was a contagious disease and Brittany was patient zero. She was completely alone in a city that charges you for breathing. She spent the first few nights in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, using the last of the cash she had hidden in her purse. When that ran out, she slept in her car until they took that too. Then she slept in a shelter. My daughter, who had grown up in a 4-bedroom colonial with a heated pool, was now waiting in line for soup and a cot, surrounded by the very people she used to look down on. The humiliation was a physical weight. She had to sell her designer clothes to a consignment shop just to buy a prepaid phone card. She stood at the counter watching the clerk examine her Italian handbags, haggling over pennies for items that had cost thousands. It was a brutal education in value. She realized that a handbag cannot shelter you from the rain. A status symbol cannot feed a child. And speaking of the child, that was the hardest blow of all. Because she had no home and no income, social services got involved. Leo was placed in temporary foster care with a distant cousin of her late mother until Brittany could prove she was stable. She had lost her husband, her home, her reputation, and her son. She was standing in the ashes of a fire she had helped start, holding nothing but a handful of debt collectors' letters. She hit rock bottom on a rainy Tuesday exactly 1 month after the trial. She was sitting on a bench in the park, soaking wet, hungry and terrified. She had no more moves. She had no more pride. The arrogance of the woman who had stood in my kitchen and told me to get over myself was gone. In its place was a frightened little girl who finally understood that the world does not owe you a living, and that loyalty to a liar is the most expensive thing a woman can ever buy. She realized then that she had traded a father who would have died for her for a husband who had let her die financially. And the realization brought her to her knees, not in prayer, but in total, crushing defeat. The storm arrived on a Thursday evening, a relentless driving downpour that turned the driveway into a river and battered the windows of the house like 1,000 angry fists. I was in the kitchen washing a single plate, enjoying the solitude that I had fought so hard to regain. Then the sensors on the front gate triggered. A yellow light blinked on the security panel. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the monitor. On the screen in grainy black and white night vision, I saw a figure. It was huddled against the wrought iron bars, shivering violently. Even through the distortion of the camera and the sheet of rain, I knew who it was. A father always knows his child, even when that child has become a stranger. It was Brittany. I didn't press the buzzer to open the gate. I didn't rush to the intercom to ask if she was okay. Instead, I put on my heavy wool coat. I buttoned it all the way to the chin. I stepped into my boots, and I picked up my umbrella. It was a large, sturdy black umbrella built to withstand high winds. I walked out the front door, locking it behind me with the satisfying beep of the biometric scanner. I walked down the long driveway slowly. I could see her watching me approach. She looked like a ghost. Her expensive coat, the one she had bought with credit cards she couldn't pay off, was soaked through, hanging off her frame like a wet rag. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was plastered to her skull. Mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines, making her look like a tragic mask. I stopped 3 feet away from the gate. I pressed the button on the umbrella handle. It snapped open with a sound like a gunshot. I held it over my head, creating a dry circle of silence amidst the roar of the rain. I stood there, warm and dry. Brittany stood on the other side of the bars, shaking water streaming down her face. I did not step forward to share the shelter. I did not angle the umbrella to cover her. I let the rain fall on her. "Dad," she choked out, her teeth chattering. "Dad, please, open the gate. It is freezing." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter who had stood in a courtroom and sworn I was insane. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband humiliate me and done nothing but sip her wine. "Why are you here, Brittany?" I asked. My voice was not angry. It was just factual. "I have nowhere to go," she sobbed, gripping the wet metal bars. "They took the apartment. They took the car. I have been sleeping at a shelter, Dad." "A shelter? I am scared. I am hungry. Please. I am your daughter. You can't leave me out here like a dog." I watched a drop of water fall from the tip of her nose. "You are my daughter," I agreed. "That is true. But you are also a 32-year-old woman who made a series of very specific choices. You chose to marry a con artist. You chose to ignore the warning signs because you liked the lifestyle he stole for you. And when the walls started to crack, instead of helping me shore up the foundation, you tried to demolish the house with me inside it." "I didn't know," she screamed, her voice competing with the thunder. "Carter lied to me too. I am a victim here, Dad." I shook my head slowly. "No, Brittany. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. You signed the papers. You spent the money. And when I tried to show you the truth, when I tried to show you the forged documents in the kitchen, you shut me down. You banned me from seeing my own grandson. You didn't do that because you were tricked. You did that because you were greedy. You wanted the inheritance more than you wanted the truth." She fell to her knees in the mud, clutching the bars. "Dad, please. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just let me in for tonight. Just one night. I will sleep on the floor. I will do anything. I just want to come home." I looked at the house behind me, the warm golden light spilling from the windows. It was a sanctuary. But sanctuaries have rules, and if you let the infection back in, the sickness returns. "This isn't your home anymore, Brittany," I said. "You forfeited your right to this shelter the night you stood by and let your husband call me a senile old fool. You made a bet. You bet on his smarts against my wisdom. You lost." "But where will I go?" she wailed. "I have nothing." I tightened my grip on the umbrella handle. The wind was picking up, trying to pull it from my hand, but I held firm. "You have your intelligence," I said. "You have your health. And you have the consequences of your actions. Those are powerful teachers, Brittany. Much more powerful than a warm bed." I reached into my pocket. For a second, her eyes lit up. She thought I was reaching for the gate remote. Instead, I pulled out a small laminated card. I slid it through the bars. It landed in the mud near her knees. "What is this?" she asked, staring at it. "It is the address of a job placement center downtown," I said. "They specialize in helping people with no resume and no references. It is hard work. It is manual labor. It pays minimum wage. But it is honest money. Dad, she screamed, outraged. I can't work manual labor, huh? I am an executive's wife. You were an executive's wife, I corrected her. Now you are a homeless woman with a lot of debt. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start rebuilding. I took a step back. The rain was coming down harder now. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just tell me you forgive me. I looked at her one last time. I felt a pang of pity deep in my chest. But pity is not love. Pity is easy. Love is hard. Love is letting someone hit rock bottom so they can finally find solid ground to stand on. I forgive you, I said. But forgiveness does not mean access. I forgive the storm for destroying the roof, Brittany. But I don't leave the windows open next time it rains. I turned around. Dad, wait, don't walk away. I didn't stop. I walked back up the driveway, the umbrella shielding me from the storm. I could hear her crying behind me, a raw, primal sound of despair. It was a painful sound to hear. But as I reached the front door and stepped into the warmth of my dry, quiet hallway, I knew I had done the only thing I could do. I had forced her to stand on her own 2 feet. And if she wanted to survive, she would have to learn how to weather the storm without my umbrella. She stopped crying for a second when I reached into my inside pocket. Her eyes tracked my hand like a starving animal tracking prey. She reached out her trembling fingers, expecting cash, expecting a check, expecting a savior. I pulled out a small blue bankbook and placed it in her palm, but I did not let go. I held it there, forcing her to look at me before she looked at the money. This is not for you, I told her, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Open it. She opened the book with wet, clumsy fingers. I saw her eyes widen as she read the balance. It was a significant sum, enough to rent an apartment for a year, enough to start over. But then she read the name on the account. Leo Vance. She looked up at me, confusion clouding her face. Dad. This is for my grandson, I said firmly. This is his tuition. This is his food. This is his safety net. I will make sure Leo never goes hungry. I will make sure he has clothes on his back and books in his bag. I will support him because he is a child. But you, I continued, pulling my hand away. You are an adult, and you are capable. But Dad, what about me, she whispered. How will I survive? You will survive the same way I did, I said. By working. I am not giving you a single cent, Brittany. Because money given is cheap, money earned is respected. You have spent your whole life spending value you did not create. Now you are going to learn what $1 actually weighs. I stepped back, pressing the remote in my pocket. The heavy iron gate began to slide shut between us with a low mechanical hum. When you can come back to this gate with a paycheck stub that has your name on it, not your husband's and not mine, then we will talk. When you understand that dignity is not something you buy, but something you build, then I will open this door. Until then, you are on your own. Dad, wait, she screamed, lunging forward. Go, be a mother your son can be proud of, I whispered. The gate clicked shut with a sound like a gavel ending a trial. I did not watch her walk away. I turned off the porch light, plunging the driveway into darkness, and walked back into the warmth of my empty house. The lesson had begun. The seasons changed 4 times before the dust finally settled on my life. 1 year. It sounds like a long time when you are waiting for a wound to heal, but looking back it feels like a blink of an eye. The house is quiet now, but it is not empty. The silence that fills the hallways is no longer heavy with tension or secrets. It is the comfortable silence of a home that has found its rhythm again. I wake up at 6 every morning, just like I always have. I grind my beans. I use my old drip coffee maker. But now I don't drink my coffee alone. I drink it while making oatmeal for a 7-year-old boy who thinks that structural engineering is a superpower. Leo lives with me full-time now. The court granted me custody while Brittany got back on her feet, and honestly, it has been the best year of my life. We spend our weekends in the garden. He has his own set of miniature tools, and he knows the difference between a weed and a perennial. He doesn't ask for video games or expensive gadgets. He asks if we can build a birdhouse. He asks if we can fix the fence. He is learning that building things with your hands is better than buying things with credit. Sometimes when I watch him playing in the yard, I see flashes of his mother in him. But not the woman who stood in court and lied. I see the little girl she used to be before the world told her that money was the only measure of success. And that gives me hope. Speaking of Brittany, she is not the same woman who stood in the rain that night. The road has been hard for her. Harder than I think she ever imagined. She didn't get a high-powered job. She didn't find a rich husband to save her. She found a job as a hostess at a diner downtown. It is not glamorous. She spends 8 hours a day on her feet. She deals with rude customers. She smells like grease and cheap coffee when she comes home to her small studio apartment. But she is doing it. For the first 6 months, she hated me. I knew she did. She wouldn't answer my calls. She would only talk to Leo on scheduled video chats, her face tight with resentment. But slowly, the anger began to fade, replaced by a weary sort of pride. She started sending me small checks, $50 here, $100 there, repayment for the legal fees I covered for her divorce. I didn't cash them. I put them in Leo's account. But the fact that she sent them meant everything. Last month, she was promoted to shift manager. She called me to tell me the news. Her voice sounded different. It wasn't the affected, high-pitched voice she used to use around Carter's friends. It was deeper, stronger. It was the voice of a woman who knows she can survive without a safety net. She told me she had paid off her last credit card. She told me she was saving up for a deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment so Leo could come stay with her on weekends. She didn't ask me for money. She just wanted me to know. We are still rebuilding the bridge between us. It is a slow process. Trust is like concrete. It takes a long time to cure, and if you rush it, it cracks. We meet for coffee once a week. We don't talk about Carter. We don't talk about the trial. We talk about Leo. We talk about the weather. We talk about the small, real things that make up a life. She looks older now. The stress has left lines around her eyes that weren't there before. She doesn't wear designer clothes anymore. She wears practical shoes and jeans. But when she smiles, it reaches her eyes. It is a real smile, not a performance for an audience. She is tired, yes, but she is free. Yesterday, I drove past the federal prison where Carter is serving his time. I didn't stop. I didn't feel the need to gloat. I just felt a sense of closure. He is living in a cage of his own making, surrounded by men who don't care about his vision or his genius. Meanwhile, the house he tried to steal is standing strong. The garden he tried to pave over is blooming. And the family he tried to destroy is slowly, painfully stitching itself back together. It is funny how life works. He wanted to strip the house to its studs to make it modern. He wanted to tear down the old to make way for the new. In a way, he succeeded. He tore us down. He stripped away the lies, the pretense, and the fake happiness. But what he didn't realize was that when you strip a house down to its frame, you find out what it is really made of. And this house, this family, we are made of steel. We bent. But we didn't break. And now we are building something new on the same old solid foundation. Something real. Something that will last. The gate hummed open on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It was a sound that used to signal an invasion, but now it signaled a visit. I sat in my leather recliner, the same one I have sat in for 20 years, with a mug of black coffee steaming on the side table. The afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful. The front door opened softly. There was no slamming. There was no shouting. Brittany walked in. She was wearing a pair of faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked younger than she had in years, but her eyes held the weight of a woman who has seen the other side of privilege. She was holding a bag of groceries. Not expensive takeout or organic delicacies, but ingredients. Flour, sugar, apples. "I brought supplies," she said softly, placing the bag on the kitchen island. "I thought maybe we could bake a pie later." "Leo loves apple pie." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the television. "That sounds like a good plan." She walked into the living room. For a moment she hesitated. I could feel her tension. She was looking at the television screen. The familiar theme music of the Antiques Roadshow was playing. It was the same show, the same time slot, the same host describing the provenance of a forgotten treasure. It was the exact same scenario that had started this entire war 2 years ago. I didn't turn around. I wanted to see what she would do. I wanted to see if the old Brittany, the one who craved the new and despised the old, was still hiding somewhere inside her. She stood there for a long time. I heard her take a breath. Then she walked around the sofa. She didn't reach for the remote. She didn't make a snide comment about watching trash. She didn't roll her eyes. Instead, she sat down on the floor, leaning her back against the sofa right near my feet. She pulled her knees up to her chest and looked at the screen. On the television, an appraiser was examining a large, ornate porcelain vase. The owner, a hopeful woman in a floral dress, was shaking with anticipation. She thought she had hit the jackpot. She thought she was holding a Ming Dynasty masterpiece that would solve all her problems. The appraiser was talking about the cobalt blue pigment. He was talking about the firing technique. Brittany watched intently. She tilted her head to the side, studying the image on the screen. "It is a fake," she said suddenly. I paused my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I looked down at her. "Why do you say that?" She pointed at the screen. "Look at the glaze near the bottom rim. It is too consistent. And the cracks in the surface, the crazing, it looks uniform, like it was done mechanically. Real aging is chaotic. Real aging has stories. That looks like it was made in a factory to look old." I looked back at the screen. A moment later, the appraiser delivered his verdict. "I am afraid this is a reproduction from the late 20th century, the expert said. "It is a decorative piece, but it holds no historical value." The woman on TV looked crushed. But in my living room, the atmosphere shifted. I looked at my daughter. For years, she had been unable to tell the difference between gold and glitter. She had married a man who was a reproduction, a fake antique made to look valuable. She had bought into a lifestyle that was all glaze and no clay. But now, sitting on my floor in her cheap jeans, she saw the truth. She had learned to spot the cracks. I smiled. It wasn't a gloating smile. It was the smile of a teacher whose student has finally passed the final exam. "You are right," I said softly. "The glaze was too perfect. And nothing real is ever that perfect." I took a sip of my coffee. "You are starting to have an eye for value, Brittany." She looked up at me then. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She smiled back, a genuine crooked smile that reminded me of her mother. "I learned from the best, Dad," she whispered. "I learned from the best." We sat there for the rest of the hour, watching the show in comfortable silence. We didn't need to talk about Carter. We didn't need to talk about the money we lost or the time we wasted. We just sat there, a father and a daughter, appreciating the things that survived the fire. Outside, Leo was laughing in the garden, chasing a butterfly. Inside, the house was sturdy, warm, and real. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but maybe, just maybe, you can teach a young person that the oldest trick in the book is the most important one of all. That integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue. That family is not an asset you leverage, but a structure you maintain. And that sometimes you have to tear everything down to the foundation just to remember who you really are. My name is Wallace King. I am a structural engineer. And finally, my house is standing tall. I often think about that night Carter turned off my television. He told me he wanted to fill this house with smart things. He was obsessed with that word. Smartphones, smart contracts, smart investments. But in his rush to be smart, he forgot to be wise. And there is a profound difference between the two. Being smart is knowing how to pick a lock. Being wise is knowing why the door was locked in the first place. Being smart is knowing how to build a tower that touches the clouds in record time. Being wise is knowing that if you don't dig deep into the mud to lay a foundation, that tower will fall the moment the wind changes. Carter and my daughter thought that my silence was slowness. They thought my caution was fear. They looked at my gray hair and my calloused hands, and they saw obsolescence. They didn't understand that these calluses are proof of survival. They didn't understand that I wasn't slow because I couldn't keep up. I was slow because I was checking the structural integrity of the ground they were running on. There is an old saying in the engineering world that I have carried with me my whole life. Youth can run fast, but age knows the shortcuts. They ran toward a cliff at full speed, convinced they could fly. I simply walked the long way around on the solid path I had built, with 40 years of honesty and hard work. And when they fell, I was still standing there, not because I was faster, but because I knew where I was going. To everyone listening to my story, especially those of you who feel like the world is moving too fast, or that you are being pushed aside by the arrogance of the new, do not doubt your value. Your experience is not baggage. It is a map. Your scars are not defects. They are lessons. And your patience is not a weakness. It is the only thing that will keep you standing when the storm comes. And that is my story. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to use tough love to save someone you care about? I read every single comment. Until next time, remember to check your foundations and never let anyone turn off your light.